Meeting is now in order. We have as our main witness for the third time this week, must be because he enjoys it so much, Minister Goodale, and I'll leave Minister Goodale to introduce his colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sure we would all want to reflect on this particular day about the loss of Mr. Brown and the impact that has had on all members of the House of Commons on all sides, and particular condolences to members of the Conservative Party, of which Mr. Brown was a very distinguished member. I note, as a side comment, Mr. Chair, that in recent days I've had the opportunity on trade-related matters to talk to a prominent American in the field of international trade, Mr. Robert Zoellick, who was a former U.S. trade representative and a distinguished American official in previous administrations. He observed that he had come to know Mr. Brown in Canada-U.S. relations, and in fact had the opportunity to visit with him in Gananoque, where Mr. Zoellick has some other connections. So Mr. Brown left a very large footprint, and one that is much respected. Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me back today. Before I begin, I would also want to take a moment to recognize all of the people across this country who are affected by spring flooding in Canada, particularly in New Brunswick, but also in Saskatchewan, in Northern Ontario, and in various parts of British Columbia. Members of the Coast Guard, the Canadian Armed Forces, the Canadian Rangers, Transport Canada, the RCMP, and others have been engaged in providing assistance, and I'm sure that all members of this committee in particular would want to join me in expressing our gratitude for the hard work of all of these interveners from the federal departments and agencies working in close collaboration with provincial and local authorities and agencies. We wish them well in the important work that they're involved in, and we're certainly hoping that everyone stays safe. I'm joined today, Mr. Chair, as you note, by some key people from within the public safety portfolio. Malcolm Brown, you're very familiar with, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety. Brenda Lucki, the new Commissioner of the RCMP, is back with us for the second time in 1 week. John Osowski is the President of the Canada Border Services Agency. Jennifer Odes is the Chair of the Parole Board of Canada, the new Chair of the Parole Board. And the board is busy this week in Ottawa, involved in training sessions for members of the board as they go about their important work across the country. Anne Kelly is the Interim Commissioner of the Correctional Service of Canada, and Charles Lawson, the Acting Director of Operations at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Je suis très fier du rôle essentiel.
I am very proud of the essential role that play all of these leaders and their organizations for the protection and the security of all Canadians and our rights and liberties.
People were with me recently at the G7 meetings in Toronto of foreign and security ministers. Canada was proud to host that particular gathering, and we look forward to hosting the upcoming Leaders Summit next month in Charlevoix. I am pleased to say G7 countries stand absolutely united in dealing with the various security threats that we all face, from terrorism and human trafficking to cybercrime and beyond. Canada also took the opportunity at those meetings in Toronto to promote greater gender equality and women's rights. Gender equality and security go absolutely hand in hand. That's a top priority for our G7 presidency and an overarching theme for all G7 discussions in the meetings that we are hosting this year. Mr. Chair, the skilled women and men of the public safety portfolio ensure that we are all well placed to respond to evolving threats. Our parliamentary responsibility is making sure that they have the resources to do so, and that, of course, brings me to the topic of this meeting, which is the main estimates for 2018-2019. Portfolio-wide, the total authorities sought here will result in a net increase of $857.2 million. That is 9.8% more than in the main estimates last year. And I'll touch briefly on just a few of the highlights. First, speaking about the G7, these estimates include $233.5 million for G7 security across the public safety portfolio. Last time I was here to discuss the estimates, I mentioned that we would be glad to provide security briefings about the G7 to Mr. Paulus and Mr. Dubé, and I understand that those briefings have in fact happened. Work is certainly well underway in coordination with provincial and municipal authorities to ensure that everyone in Charlevoix and the surrounding areas is safe and secure. I'm also aware that there will likely be people engaging in demonstrations during the G7. Our government will always defend the democratic rights of Canadians to demonstrate and protest, provided it happens peacefully and within the bounds of the law. Canadians also expect police officers to maintain public safety while respecting the law and professional codes of conduct. And to that end, I would welcome the expected observers from Amnesty International and La Ligue des Droits et Libertés. The main estimates also include an increase of $48.6 million for CBSA. That funding will go to things including immigration and security screening, border processing, and inland enforcement. This is part of our commitment to ensure that the border remains secure while open to the expeditious flow of legitimate trade and travel. Border Services officers are professionals who do a difficult job prioritizing security while treating people with humanity and compassion. I thank them and members of the RCMP for being so adept at handling what has recently been a very challenging border situation. It is in large part thanks to the RCMP and CBSA, as well as their colleagues in IRCC, that public safety is being maintained, that Canadian law is being applied, and that our international obligations are being upheld. The estimates also include $41.1 million in increased funding for the First Nations policing program. This is part of the investment that we announced in January of almost $300 million over 5 years, the largest increase in funding for the First Nations policing program since its inception almost 30 years ago. I am pleased to report that of the 42 agreements with First Nations that have been due for renewal, 29 are either signed or in the very final stages of completion, and officials are working very hard at the remainder. There's also an increase in these estimates of $18.9 million in funding for the Correctional Service, and another $1.3 million for Public Safety Canada to manage vulnerable offenders appropriately and effectively within our corrections system. That refers particularly to people with mental illnesses, as well as Indigenous offenders and women. We know that our correctional system needs to be world-class at both security and rehabilitation, because that is the best way of reducing recidivism and keeping communities safe. There's an increase in the estimates of $20 million for the National Disaster Mitigation Program to increase resilience so that natural disasters don't cause as much damage as they might otherwise do. There's $19.1 million to build capacity to address drug-impaired driving, including for officer training, And there's $23.4 million for the Memorial Grant Program, a new program which will provide $300,000 to the families of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics who die as a direct result of their duties. This program is effective this past April 1st. It is, as you know, a very large portfolio, public safety and emergency preparedness, and I'm aware that your committee has had a full plate too, recently studying the correction system as well as national security legislation, and you've now begun studying Bill C-71 related to firearms. I cannot promise that the pace is going to slow down. In all likelihood, it will probably go in the opposite direction and get faster. But I can promise that our government will continue to prioritize public safety, while at the same time ensuring that Canadian rights and freedoms are well protected. And it is the men and women at this table who represent the leadership of the public safety portfolio and everyone that they represent who make such a huge contribution every day and work so hard to make sure that Canadians are safe and to make sure that their rights and freedoms are protected. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. And I just remind colleagues that time stands still for no one, and we have a clock. So with that, we have Mr. Spengeman for 7 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I'd like to start out just by echoing and expressing my own appreciation for the opening sentiments in memory of our colleague Gordon Brown, particularly as this funeral is taking place at this very moment where this committee is gathered. Minister Goodale, it's good to have you back with your senior team. I'd like to start out by asking you to elaborate on the status of CBSA contingency planning. In the main estimates, is there specific funding and are there resources that are being allocated to manage the flow of irregular migration at our borders? And could you update the committee on what other measures, if any, are being taken to address this situation at the moment?
Yes, CBSA is front and center in coping with the unusual situations that have existed at the borders. In response to that, CBSA made a number of internal resource reallocations last year, but in Budget 2018, a specific pool of funds was set aside for CBSA, IRCC, the RCMP, and others to make sure that the capacity was there to deal with the border situation as it might evolve this year. Mr. Osowski is with me and has the greatest direct perspective on the resources that are becoming available and what those resources would be used for. And sure. I'd ask John to comment on that.
Sure. Thank you, Minister. So as the Minister mentioned, the budget proposed $72 million for CBSA over 2 years, about 49.6, I believe, this fiscal year, and the balance for next fiscal year. And that's basically to allow us to look at the lessons learned from last year and allow us to sort of do proper contingency planning for a surge that may happen. And so we've done a lot of on-the-ground work with the RCMP, with Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada to make sure that we've got the right facilities and the right processes in place to sort of manage the flows as they approach us.
Mr. Osowski, what's your assessment of the current situation on the ground?
So we're getting around 70 to 80 people a day, so it's very manageable. I have about, I think last night, 169 people on site that were sort of working their way through the process. So I would say it's very manageable right now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Minister Goodale, the Memorial Grant Program that you briefly addressed in your opening remarks is one that is certainly very much appreciated by the community of first responders in my riding of Mississauga Lakeshore. I'm wondering if you could just take a moment to get a bit more into the details of how the program is structured, how families would apply for it, and also with respect to the money that's allocated in the mains, how the division of funds is thought through in terms of what's available for grants and what's available for administration of that program.
On the latter point about the division of resources, between administration and actual grant funding. I'd ask Mr. Brown to comment, but the point is simply this, Mr. Spangelman. We call upon the tri-services, as they're referred to, fire, police, and paramedics, to do extraordinary things. This memorial grant is something that the three services have been arguing for probably 20 to 25 years, as they come to the Hill every year and make their representations to government and to members of Parliament. The House of Commons passed a motion on this topic about 5 years ago, crossed all party lines, expressing support for the principle. And when I became the minister 2.5 years ago, I was determined to get this into law so that at whatever a level, whether it's at the municipal level or provincial or the federal level, at whatever level a firefighter or a police officer or a paramedic is functioning, if the worst should happen, and they should lose their lives in the course of performing their duties, then the Government of Canada would, through this program, provide a tax-free payment of $300,000 to their families to acknowledge their service and to help, to the extent that money can help in the difficult transition to the loss of a loved one. We are in the process of a public competition for an administrator for the program, an outside firm that has the expertise in dealing with programs of this kind. This administrator would provide the liaison with the first responder community, providing information, setting up a website to assist them with information, to handle the initial influx of applications and so forth. Hopefully, we will not have many applications, but sadly, we will have a flow. We've budgeted the funding on the basis of an actuarial analysis of what we might likely expect and on past experience. And the effective date is April 1st. So any deaths that occur after that date will be covered by the program. The administrator will handle the initial contact with the families, but it will be the Department of Public Safety that makes the final call with respect to eligibility for the program. We want this to be smooth and generous and compassionate, because that's what it's intended for, to assist those who have suffered that terrible loss of a loved one, losing their lives in the line of duty. Mr. Brown,
unfortunately, Mr. Spangelman's time has expired. Mr. Palus, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for your kind words of our colleague, Mr. Brown. We've learned today from the Criminal Investigation Branch that the MS-13 street gang is taking advantage and exploiting the border system, and the tweet made by Justin Trudeau a few days ago. They are present in Vancouver and in Toronto. They're a criminal organized gang. They're into human trafficking, particularly prostitution. They are disturbing many other Canadian communities. And what can you do to improve our strengthening at the border to avoid these people coming in?
The activities of human traffickers, human smugglers, is of grave concern to the government, regardless of political persuasion, and I'm sure to all members of Parliament. We have, over the course of the last several budgets, set aside new funds that are specifically aimed at all forms of gender-based violence, including smuggling and trafficking.
Mais je comprends. M'excuse de vous interrompre, Monsieur le ministre.
I apologize for interrupting you, but currently the situation at the border, we're talking budget, right? We have an increase of 48 million approximately for CBSA. Okay, that's fine. However, Canadians are used to seeing on TV women, children coming across the border, but we've had this information for quite a while, but officially criminal gangs are mixed in with these incoming people, and they're taking advantage of the situation. Are we going to try to change our process or anything else? We have to identify these people, and can they be arrested and detained immediately if they discover to be gang members?
Mr. Paulus, as I've said many times in the House of Commons, whenever someone comes across the border in a fashion that is circumventing the normal port of entry, when they come across the border in that irregular way, they are immediately arrested. Arrested in the first instance by the RCMP. At a later stage, they're transferred to the jurisdiction of the CBSA, but they are identified according to biographic information, biometric information. All of that is checked against our own Canadian databases and American databases for anything that deals with criminality or an immigration problem or a security issue. And if indeed a criminal is identified in that process, they are turned over to police authorities for the normal processing of criminal behavior.
Vous savez comme moi que souvent ces gens-là.
You know as well as I, Mr. Minister, that they often arrive without any kind of identification, no papers. And if you don't have any information in the American database, we won't be able to identify them at all. Do our regular immigration rules force us to release them?
About their identity, or a question about criminality, or any issue related to a risk to the public, or a doubt that they might not present themselves in the normal course for subsequent proceedings, they can be and they are detained. If the officials at the border, which include the RCMP in the first instance, and CBSA and IRCC later on. If there is any doubt about any of those matters, they are in fact detained to ensure public safety.
C'est ce qu'on espère. Deuxième question, Monsieur le ministre.
Or at least we hope so. Second question. When we ask questions at question period in the last couple of weeks, we are accused of having cut $300 billion or $1 million rather for CBSA. I have a document here that says the exact contrary. From 2012 to 2015, the Conservative improved the budget by $300 million, and your government, except for this year where you are re-implementing it, it has been reduced. Are you ready to see that $300 million cut by the Conservative document is false? And
those numbers with you, Mr. Paulus, because there is the departmental performance report for CBSA for the year 2014-15, and we all recall who was in government in 2014-15. Where the government of the day is making very proud statements about how they are cutting the budget for CBSA by $148 million, in which the cuts will continue in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. That's the departmental performance report of CBSA as filed in Parliament. And I would note that in addition to the funding that's referred to in these estimates, there has been additional funding approved for CBSA for a broad variety of initiatives to make sure that we're backfilling the losses that the agency sadly incurred under the previous administration.
Monsieur le ministre, je suis obligé d'aller vite parce que le président.
Thank you. I don't mean to rush you, but the chair is going to cut me off, and I'll give you this document. We've done our research, and you'll see. Final question. Deportation. Deportation of illegal immigrants. 26,000 individuals crossed the border in such fashion, and you told us that 90% of the people would probably be refused entry. Do you have the money to deport 28,000, 30,000 people? It's your mandate, together with the RCMP and CBSA, to return people to their countries.
If a person is determined to be inadmissible, then they are to be removed as quickly as possible. And that is exactly what CBSA strives to do in every case, and part of the new money that we've referred to here will increase the capacity of CBSA to move forward on those removals.
Mr.
You have an idea of the cost?
Monsieur Paulus, 7 minutes. Mr. Davies, welcome to the committee.
Thank
7
you.
minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the New Democratic Party, I'd like to express our condolences to all colleagues, particularly my colleagues in the Conservative Party, on the passing of Mr. Brown. He will be missed. I also want to take this opportunity to offer, on behalf of our party, our warmest congratulations to Commissioner Luckey, and our best wishes for her as she takes on this important role. I must say for the record that I had the good fortune of attending high school with Commissioner Luckey. And out of an abundance of chivalry and to set the record straight, I'm older. Minister, thank you for being with us. My first question is, the department plan indicates a planned decrease in funding related to the grant to compensate RCMP members injured in the performance of their duties in 2019-2020 when compared to 2018-2019. Can you explain the reason for that decrease?
I would have to ask Mr. Brown or Ms. Luckey to comment on that. The funding obviously is related to the need, and obviously the force would always want to be in a position to provide the appropriate support for those who are injured in the course of their duties. These estimates, though, will provide, as you know, only a snapshot at a certain location in time. If additional funding is required to deal with a need that had not been anticipated in these estimates, then that would be accommodated in the supplementaries.
Thank you. That's good to hear. If that unfortunate event does come to pass. The departmental plan also indicates a long-term reduction in staffing for the Security, Intelligence and Review Committee, reducing the number of full-time positions from 24.5 in 2018-2019 to 13.5 in 2020-21. It's also indicated on the government's website that the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency will replace the Security Intelligence Review Committee and the Office of the Communications Security Establishment Commissioner. So my question, Minister, is what kind of budget is NCIRA expected to have when compared to CERC and the CSE to ensure that we're not weakening and diluting our national security review process and oversight by giving the new agency a much broader mandate and more departments to oversee without the commensurate resources to match their new mandate?
Mr. Davies, I would love to answer that question in excruciating detail. The problem is the review function is now being vested in the Privy Council office. And that's obviously to avoid any conflict of interest with the operational agencies. The principle is that the review function is separated from the operational function so that the review can be independent and impartial and comprehensive. But I can tell you that as this new structure was devised, we took great care to determine to what extent could the new review function be covered by a transition from the old review agencies, and to what extent would there be a new burden on the new review agency because its mandate would be broader and there would be interdepartmental connections. So
So you're not concerned about any weakening or dilution of the oversight?
Absolutely not. We have been meticulous in making sure that it is stronger, not weaker.
Thank you. I want to turn to the impending cannabis legalization. If you believe the government statements about July 1, then we're a matter of 7 weeks away from cannabis potentially being legalized in this country. And we in the New Democrats have been raising the issue of having an agreement with the U.S. to protect Canadian citizens from peril as they approach the border. Recently, in fact this week, U.S. Ambassador to Canada Bruce Heyman, former, said, "I actually think Canada has to negotiate this out. This is not something where one person should be making individual decisions. I think CBSA and U.S. Customs and Border Protection need to have an understanding as to how best to approach it. We really need to figure this out government to government so you don't have one-off operations at 117 border crossings." This was followed up yesterday by U.S. immigration lawyer Len Saunders from Blaine, Washington, who warned that without an agreement, this approach is dangerous. And he said many issues will be created for many people because Canadians could be barred for life from entering the United States for simply admitting that they've consumed cannabis legally or otherwise. My question, Minister, is do you have an agreement between Canada and the United States that will protect Canadians and their travel interests and business interests once cannabis is legalized in Canada?
Mr. Davies, the dialogue between Canada and the United States has been ongoing on this issue and many others, but specifically on this issue for quite some time. We have wanted to make sure that the Department of Homeland Security and all of the agencies that function under DHS are well aware in great detail of how the Canadian law will change and why that change is appropriate. And that the flow of information has been going back and forth very effectively. One thing we point out to the United States is that cannabis crossing the border, the international boundary, in either direction is illegal today, and it will remain illegal after Bill C-45 is enacted. Nothing changes in that regard.
I don't mean to interrupt, Mr. But I'm talking about the consumption, not the transfer of cannabis across borders. But if I admit that I smoked marijuana in the past and it's against U.S. federal law, can you assure me and other Canadians that once it's legal here, that that's not going to affect my ability to enter the United States? Yes or no?
You should always answer questions at the border truthfully, and the best advice that one can give is that Canadians should be aware when they come to the border, they are entering a country that has a different federal law. So you should not engage in behavior that would provoke or prompt an American border officer to be suspicious about your behavior.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Davies. And I'm somewhat curious as to what your high school yearbook says about who is most likely to succeed. Yes. Ms. DeBruzen, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Minister, for coming here today. I was happy that you highlighted in your opening statements the additional funding that's going to First Nations policing. And I was wondering if you could perhaps talk a bit more about what is being done with First Nations policing. Why is it important? Because we're clearly making some significant contributions to increase that program. What's the benefit to this program, and where do we see it going?
The benefits are very clearly proper public safety, proper policing in all parts of Canada. Regardless of where Canadians live, they should be entitled to expect equality of service from the police agencies that have jurisdiction. The existing First Nations policing program, if my memory serves me correctly, covers about 430 communities, and that represents some 400,000 people. And the increase that we have added in funding is the largest contribution to that program since it was first invented in about 1991. The funding will allow for the improvement in the officer ratio, so an increased number of police officers, better pay for those police officers, better working conditions for the police officers, safer conditions, so that they can deliver their services to the communities in which they operate in a safe and secure manner. The program has done good work in the past. The statistics show that public safety is higher and crime rates are lower in those communities that are served by the First Nations policing program. But we can always do better. And the local chiefs of police and First Nations chiefs have indicated to us repeatedly that the program does need to be upgraded. They need more officers. Their officers need to be paid on par with other police forces in the country, that they need to have better equipment and operating procedures and so forth. They also need to have their infrastructure upgraded. So we've been working on all of these fronts with the First Nations leadership nationally and with individual communities. And we are now nearing the end of the negotiations, community by community by community, to implement the new funding. It will flow over the course of the next 5 years. And the two very good things about this funding that are new and different, apart from it being more, the things that are new or different is, first of all, the funding going forward will be indexed. There's an inflation factor built in to protect against rising costs. And secondly, the commitment is not just for these first 5 years, but ongoing at this level. We may well need to negotiate improvements and increases to the program on top of this base funding, but this is now all in the base, and it is on a go-forward basis, so it doesn't just expire when the next 5 years comes to an end. It has that longevity attached to it.
Thank you very much for that. The other thing that I noted when you made your opening remarks was about funding for vulnerable offenders in the correctional system in the main estimates. And as you know, this committee, in fact, recently studied Indigenous incarceration specifically. I was wondering if you could speak to what is this money going to go to? How is this going to help our vulnerable offenders?
The funding that has been identified in the last couple of budgets, and part of which is specifically referred to in the estimates, is aimed toward Indigenous offenders, aimed toward those with mental health issues, and aimed toward women in particular in the correctional system. The correctional service has been working very hard to make sure that their services to vulnerable population groups are increased and are more effective at treating those groups of people appropriately within the system, increasing their chances of rehabilitation, and therefore the likelihood that they can be reintegrated ultimately into society in a safe manner. And this is Ann Kelly's first opportunity to appear before this committee. And Ann, I just wonder if you have a word or two to add about the innovative approach that the Correctional Service is taking in dealing with those vulnerable groups, Indigenous, women, and those with mental health issues.
Opportunity, but please.
Yes, thank you for the question. So for us, the one innovative thing that we've done is, as I mentioned before, this committee is create the establishment of Aboriginal intervention centres. And what that means is for Aboriginal offenders, they get earlier access to programming. Once they successfully complete the program, there's a review of their security classification. And what we're noticing is there's an increase in offenders that are getting a minimum security classification, therefore going to lower security. The other thing is by accessing program earlier, what we hope is their cases are going to be prepared for presentation for decision by the Parole Board of Canada.
You have about 40 seconds.
Yeah, 40 seconds. I just wanted to note, in fact, and I wanted to thank you, Minister. I noticed there's additional funding for the security infrastructure program as well. When I look at the main estimates, I know that that is something that I've heard considerable interest in my community about. And so I know that we have only 20 seconds. I'll leave it at that, but just thank you for seeing that extra funding. I'm happy to see it.
That's a good program. It's served well. And now that we've expanded the terms and made the program more broadly publicized, the demand level has gone up, and in future years we're going to have to examine whether or not the allocations we've budgeted so far are sufficient to meet the demand.
Thank you, Ms. DeBruzen. Mr. Motts, 5 minutes, please.
Chair, and I appreciate the committee taking the time at the beginning of this meeting to remember Gordon Brown, as well as your comments, Mr. Minister, given his life celebration is occurring as we speak. Thank you for that. Minister, my colleague talked about MS-13 using the loophole that exists now and the illegally crossing the border, and you had mentioned that you use biometrics and all the means possible to identify them to see if they have any records, and I appreciate that. However, we know from CBSA on the ground officers that the biometric system is broken. It's not working right now. As we speak today, it doesn't work. And they're not being trained on how to use it. And the live scan devices, and apparently there's over 10,000 of these live scan fingerprints in a holding tank or repository that are seated and not associated with any person. If that's the case, how are we sure that the illegal border crossers are not posing a threat to Canadian security?
Mr. Motts, the process that is used at the border by both the RCMP and CBSA is intended to be and is strong and secure based on the best information available and the best technology available. The statistics that we have accumulated over the course of the last year of experience where the irregular movement has been most pronounced would indicate that the numbers where there is a criminal issue involved are very small. Maybe I could ask Mr. Osowski to comment further, because his officers are responsible for administering this.
They might be small in the numbers that have crossed to date, but we know that there are criminal elements that will exploit this and are exploiting the illegal border crossers. And I'll move on. So we do know that the costs with the illegal border crossers are extensive. We do know from immigration estimates that each immigrant or each illegal border crosser, while they wait through the process, receives $15,000 to $20,000 annually in government handouts. There's associated costs, additional costs on top of that. We do know, if you listen to the reports from yourself and Minister Hussein that suggest that 90% of these will be deported, and you've indicated that you try to have them deported as quickly as possible. However, CBSA and immigration tell us that their deportation can take years. We know we have over 14,000 people on a deportation inventory already, not even counting the illegal border crossers. And I'm curious to ask a couple questions. One, how are you going to pay the $300 million plus taxpayer dollars to cover the cost of illegal border crossers? This is just the 2017 numbers, and those are going to be higher in 2018. And will those who are being ordered deported continue to receive social assistance while they drag out the system?
Mr. Motts, part of what you've asked falls within the jurisdiction of IRCC in terms of their settlement processes. In terms of the security issues, which are the ones that are my responsibility, we have calculated as carefully as possible what the increased requirements are for CBSA and the RCMP, and the funds that were announced in the budget, and some of which are included in these estimates, are adequate, we believe, on the basis of what we know now to cover the incremental costs for policing and border security.
Okay, so
and
just
those are
in
the
line
things
with
that
that,
are
sir.
covered in these estimates.
So in line with that, we do know that the inventory that exists with deportation currently, without the illegal border crossers, we've been told that they can't get to them because of resources. It's expensive. If they leave voluntarily, it's $1,500 about. If depending where they're from and where they have to be taken to, it could be $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 to remove one, one order deported. If that's the case, where is the money going to come from? Is CBSA properly resourced to deal with the current backlog of inventory deportation orders? And then we have the potentially tens of thousands more that are going to be order deported.
Well, CBSA will
Excuse
be
me,
better.
Minister. That's an important question, but unfortunately, Mr. Motts has left you no time to answer it. So I'm sure you will circle back in on that because it is an important question.
Yeah, it certainly is, and there are a lot of innuendos buried in that question as well that demand a very vigorous response.
Okay. Well, we're going to have another occasion to do that. Ms. Damoff, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And Minister, you've already talked about the Memorial Grant Program, and I on Friday night, the Halton Regional Police Association organized a Battle of the Badges, which had public safety officers boxing to raise money for Camp Faces, which is for families of first responders who've died in the line of duty and by suicide. So on behalf of the 1,000 people that were there and the many others in my riding and across Canada, I just want to thank you sincerely for putting that program in place. It means a lot to those families.
And you make a point, Ms. Damoff, that I think is important, that in terms of a public safety officer that has died as a result of suicide, that also is included in the criteria.
Oh, that's wonderful. I wasn't aware of that, actually, Minister. Thank you. Did you want to respond to Mr. Motts? I do have a question, but did you want to take the opportunity to respond to that, or it's up to you?
Well, Mr. Osowski has some responses to us about the effectiveness of the work of CBSA. There's a provision in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, Section 133 of the Act, that says, regardless of how a person has crossed the border, the first obligation of the Government of Canada is to determine that person's status. If they are determined to be a legitimate refugee seeking asylum and entitled to the protection of Canada, then they proceed through the system. If they are determined not to be in need of Canada's protection, then they are removed. But the law obliges the government to first of all make that determination. Is their asylum claim legitimate or not? And we are meticulously following the law to make sure that we answer that question properly first and foremost. And I would note that Section 133 is the law today. It's been the law for the last 2.5 years. It's the law for the previous decade. And it was not changed by the previous government.
And Minister, are Canadians safe? Because there seems to be innuendo here that Canadians are not safe. Are you confident that our security agencies are doing their fine work and that Canadians are safe?
We are so fortunate in this country to have a border services agency like CBSA and a police force like the RCMP and all of their municipal and local counterparts that they work with so effectively to serve Canadians with distinction. And yes, indeed, they accomplish standards of safety and security in this country that are among the highest in the world.
Thank you, Minister. I only have 2 minutes left, so I actually did have a question about the opportunity for inmates in corrections to get training and work. So one of the things that was restored in corrections are the penitentiary farms. There was $2.4 million for that. I had the opportunity to visit both in Edmonton and Winnipeg corrections facilities where they've talked about the importance of this type of training and work. And in fact, in Edmonton, I visited the Corcan facility that was shut down by the previous government. And I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about these programs and also whether there's any opportunity to restore these Corcan facilities and provide job training for inmates, because we do know that their success on the outside is dependent on them receiving this kind of training and being able to find work when they're released from prison.
We have made the commitment, Ms. Damoff, to reestablish prison farms at the 2 locations where they previously existed around Kingston. That initiative is underway. We hope to learn from that initiative about the proper way to go about this and about their effectiveness, their value in terms of rehabilitation within the system. Based on that experience, we would look forward to expanding this program elsewhere in the country based on what we learn around Kingston. But in terms of job training and preparations to re-enter society, that's a core function of the correctional service. Obviously, public safety is job number 1, but preparing people to re-engage with society in a crime-free way after sentences have been served, that is also a major objective of the CSC. And again, Anne, do you have anything further you'd like to say on that topic?
If she does, she's going to have to work it into another answer. I regret that time respects no one. Mr. Palouse, 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've seen in the budgetary cuts linked to the immigration crises. We've seen what the Prime Minister has said. They were looking for 146 million reimbursements to the for the costs incurred. If we take all the agencies, all public safety agencies and such, what has been the budget increase to deal with this immigration crisis across the board?
In the last year, the situation, as you know, began in an unusual way during the month of January of last year. January of last year. And the agencies, principally CBSA and the RCMP, were able, through the course of last year, 2017, to reorganize their affairs in such a way that they did not require an incremental request for funding. As they approached the new fiscal year, they both advised the government that they could continue to a certain extent in reallocating resources, but they were probably to the limit of the flexibility that they had internally, and accordingly the government in the budget put forward a financial commitment of $173 million more, and part of that is reflected in these estimates. There's more to come, but this is the beginning.
Parfait. Donc, sécurité publique, 173.
Good. Public safety and security, 173 million. Okay. Now, C-45, C-46, and driving while impaired. Your colleague, Mr. Blair, said C-45 could come into effect even if 46 isn't ready. As Minister responsible for public safety, you accept that marijuana would become legal and that people could be driving, but the RCMP, the Commissioner is here today, perhaps Mr. Blair might make one statement, but you're the Minister, so if 46 isn't ready, C-46, even if you can legalize with 45?
With impaired driving, whether it's drug impaired or alcohol impaired, the problem with impaired driving exists today. It's already here. And that's why in C-46 we have created new offenses, we've provided for new funding and new technology to better deal with all forms of impaired driving, whether it's cannabis or anything else. And the sooner Parliament can deal with Bill C-46, the better. It's not contingent on C-45 because the problem already exists.
But that's not what was said when C-45 was tabled in the House. C-45, C-46, they're a pair of bills. They're you can't really separate them. But there's going to be a delay legislatively, technically, for the C-46, and the government is hard put to absolutely want to push through C-45, even if 46 is not yet ready.
Legislation proceed. C-45 corrects a problem that has existed for almost 100 years. The law with respect to cannabis in Canada has been long-standing, and for that 100 years, it has been an abject failure. It has not kept marijuana out of the hands of our kids, and it has not kept the proceeds out of the hands of organized crime. So obviously, the existing law is not working. We need to change the approach. C-45 changes the approach. C-46 deals with a larger and different problem of all forms of impaired driving, whether it's drug impaired or alcohol impaired, creating new offenses, new technologies and new techniques to keep our roads safer. And it needs to be passed promptly too.
Donc, merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Pour finir,
Thank you, Mr. Minister. To return to budget cuts. So you maintain the position of what you have replied to us every day in the House today, that the Conservatives cut $300 million, whereas I have a report here from the Library of Parliament, hot off the press, says the contrary. You maintain that position?
I would be glad to see the library's opinion, but the fact of the matter is, over the last 5 years, the previous government, they cut very close to $400 million from CBSA and very close to $500 million from the RCMP.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palouse. We started a little late, but I think Mr. Picard, if you could finish off with the final 5 minutes, please.
J'aimerais porter mon attention.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring your attention to the RCMP component. It seems that we are looking forward to a reduction to the, the ministerial plan is trying to look at some shortcomings as to money laundering, the whole concept of financial crime, the whole field. I'd like to have your opinion, your perspective on what problems are currently being faced and what recommendations you would bring to improve our fight against money laundering and against white-collar crime.
Mr. Picard, are very sophisticated in the way they organize themselves, the way they hide their activities, the way they launder their proceeds. They're constantly changing and morphing into different forms and shapes and different types of activities. The RCMP and all of the agencies that they work with need to be just as sophisticated, just as nimble and agile to detect and collect the evidence and prosecute the offenses that are committed. That requires interagency cooperation, and you are very expert yourself in the type of integrated teams that need to be drawn together to deal with money laundering and the activities of organized crime. You also need to make sure you've got first-rate technology, because the criminals use it, and we need to have that degree of sophistication in law enforcement. So you need the coordination and collaboration. You need the sophisticated technology. You also need a new generation of police officer that may not have the style or the aptitude that is traditional in law enforcement, but does have a skill set in relation to financial crime, forensic accounting, the use of the digital economy, and so forth. And that implies a recruitment effort by the RCMP that goes beyond the conventional. And if I could, and I can stop here and ask Commissioner Lucky to address that matter particularly, because she was the commander of the training division in Depot in Regina, and she has some very important ideas on the recruitment of perhaps civilian resources that have the particular expertise that the force will need to deal with these these sophisticated organized crime organizations.
Please, thank you.
As mentioned at the committee earlier this week, we are looking at innovative ways of attracting the civilian aspect with the specialized resources, both in commercial crime, as an example, in money laundering. At the training academy, each cadet that comes to the academy, we get an overview of their background, and if they have background in any of those areas, we have a specific staffing officer that deals with federal type mandate, and they review that, and if there's an opportunity to streamline that person into that area, we take every opportunity to do that.
Compte tenu de la complexité des transactions,
Given the complexity of financial transactions and the corporate organizations that are cooperating and working in that to arrive at the end, very often this expertise is beyond that of the RCMP, whether it's in matters of finance or brokering or corporate financing in general. You would have to be recruiting civilians from the out of the organization at a salary that will in fact retain them within the organization.
No.
No. Okay. Well, we're going to have to leave it at there.
The principle is probably yes.
Yeah. We're going to have to leave that as a hanging question. On behalf of the committee, Minister, I appreciate your appearance. With that, we will suspend for a couple of minutes and reconvene and allow the minister to leave. So again, thank you.
could take their seats. Okay, the meeting is back in order. I just say to colleagues, I don't particularly enjoy cutting off answers or questions. So if you could take a look at the chair from time to time, just so that you have some feel for what the time is on the clock. So I'm assuming there's no further opening statements, Mr. Brown, and I'll just go to Ms. Demoff for the first round of 7 minutes.
I think Mr. Picard is in the second round. We're going to switch so he can continue on.
Mr. Picard?
And then I'll take his 7.
Okay. Well, Mr. Picard then.
Thank you. Well, let's keep on talking about my favorite subject, money laundering. La problématique, on avait arrêté notre question.
Well, the problem, we were looking at the problem of finding the expertise because of the training that's available at your depot, at the academy. They need a practical, it's very practical, it's good, but we also need the knowledge in depth, and it's not available, I don't think, in your curriculum at the depot. Now, a recent article we read about the situation in Toronto. They're starting to open up the recruitment based on the experience of candidates and opening it to INET, for example, if we compare with, and give INET an equivalent level of expertise to the organizations who don't seem to have any problem going out and recruiting the human resources or developing the technology needed to combat money laundering.
Saying earlier, we do recruit specialized civilian resources, and we have been successful both in Vancouver and Toronto with specific Crown prosecutors, for example, that are trained to deal with those specific crimes. We're bringing them in specifically for that. We also work closely with financial institutions, sort of in a partnership when we need certain specialties, but we definitely need to recruit continually in those specialized areas for exactly those laws.
Un des défis qui avait été...
One of the challenges that was appropriately resolved with the development of these integrated, the IMET teams, the integrated teams, the whole concept of integrated teams would allow various organizations, be they provincial or federal, to work together in partnership and to get better results on any investigation or case, better resolution and better distribution of the tasks in hand. However, there's a whole number of agencies who be working together or involved in any specific case, for example, including the RCMP, Revenue Canada, ISED, Competition Bureau perhaps, and for each file, each case, you need to see how you're going to integrate this from a high level so that there's not too much redundancy, a good distribution of responsibility and mandates or portions of the tasks, and make sure that there's no gaps. How is the RCMP developing a working model, a process, a protocol, in working in this fashion on money laundering cases? Perhaps without necessarily having to go out and buy ultra expensive expertise somewhere, and yet coordinate all of these with the various agencies, organizations, and bodies involved.
To the specific working model, but what I can say is that there is integration with other government departments who have such specialties, as well as other police agencies. We have an integrated approach. So if they have some specialized resource that we can draw upon, we will, and we try to reduce, obviously, with that integration, we try to reduce the redundancies that are made with that. We do have a working group at the federal level that's ongoing to develop and establish that best approach that you're exactly speaking about.
Thank you. Merci. Au niveau de la douane,
Customs now, moving along. The illegal entry, of course, is always popular, but it seems that we are reading in the media and others, various organizations are suggesting that this summer will be a challenge along the same scale as that of last year for illegal entry. Last summer, we learned a lot from the experience, of course. What lessons have you learned from last summer's events allowed you to perhaps prepare or develop countermeasures without having to go maintaining security for Canadians, but also perhaps an evolution in the approach that's taken so that we can be more efficient and perhaps even strengthen the process of dealing with these people who are arriving at the border? Thank you for the question.
A lot from last summer. It came up very quickly. I think Jacques, my Vice President of Operations, remembers, I think, August 10th very well, with 9th when 470 people showed up. And so we've done a lot working with our colleagues in RCMP, immigration, and public safety to sort of work on our contingency planning for this summer. So we are expecting around the same volume. It could be more, although it's a bit of a black art to predict what might happen. But that has actually led us to look at the processes in terms of making sure that we're as efficient and as effective as possible. And I want to assure the committee members that no one leaves the port of entry until we're satisfied that they do not pose a risk. So all of the criminality checks are done, and no one leaves until we're satisfied that there's no risk to the public. If there's something that we cannot resolve over a short period of time, there might be a detention involved until we resolve that, but no one leaves the port of entry until those issues are resolved to our satisfaction.
Le seul message qui existe au niveau de la pression sur les ressources humaines vient...
A lot of pressure on human resources, and it seems to be coming, it's always the same thing. It's always human resources pressure. Now, can you enlighten us as to the reality of that pressure at the front, at the border? If the demand doesn't drop, and if the pressure continues on your staff or your personnel, there's an urgent need, I think, to increase that, because otherwise it's a threat to national security.
Merci pour la question. I would say that last year, one of the things we did very effectively was rotate people in and out on 4 to 6 weeks assignments. So we were able to sort of maintain our pace in other areas. And quite frankly, when you go there and talk to my officers, they've enjoyed the change of pace and the experience. It's something unusual for some of them who have come from smaller ports of entry that might not have been involved in this kind of work, and so they're learning new skills. But that said, it is always a strain just in terms of the logistics of moving people around and making sure that I have capacity where I need it at any given point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Picard. Monsieur Palus, 7 minutes.
Dans la lignée de...
Thank you, Chair. Along the same lines as my colleague, Mr. Picard, when these entrants, these people are released and they end up in the area of Montreal, is the RCMP still on watch for these people, or does it flip over to the Sûreté Québec, the SQ? In other words, once the individual is authorized to go out and live in civilian society, and if they have to perhaps return for a meeting with the immigration, they don't show up again. They never show up. They disappear. A great number of them, I believe, don't show up for a second interview or anything like that. They disappear into the vast wash of society.
The process is, once they're released, so as I've mentioned, no one with any security issues is released, and they go further on, and their eligibility is determined in terms of their refugee status, ultimately ending up in a hearing before an Immigration Refugee Board member. But in terms of making sure that they show up for that hearing, that's our responsibility. And so we work with IRB in terms of the security screening process and the timing of that hearing, and make sure that they show up for that. If they don't show up for that, then we're in contact with them If they still don't show up with them for that, because there may be legitimate reasons in terms of scheduling conflicts or something. But if they don't show up, then we would start to enforce a removal order.
Actuellement, vous pouvez me confirmer qu'il y a...
Well, I can confirm that about 10%, I believe, of those seeking asylum last year didn't show up for the second meeting with the immigration authorities, and we have no idea where they are in Canada today.
Why?
I'm confident that we have good fidelity about where they are and where their whereabouts are.
Okay. Est-ce que...
Well, okay. Well, you're lucky if you know where people are that they refuse to show up, but perhaps a confirmation from you, if you can. When there's a confirmation or detection and identification that people of criminal background, or there seems to be a dubious case that they are detained. Now there are some seekers, asylum seekers, that died in detention. So perhaps in order to avoid any deaths in a carceral context, they're being released a little early. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Some statistics in terms of the criminality from last year. So as you're aware, in terms of between ports of entry asylum seekers, we had 20,593 for the calendar year. In that same time, we had 102, or actually 104, pardon me, where there were some cases of criminality. So the numbers are very, very low. And until we resolve that criminality, no one leaves the port of entry.
Pour la GRC, comme ça, la GRC, lundi, lorsque vous nous avez rencontrés...
So for the RCMP, Monday you told us that you'd be ready to deal with the legalization of marijuana, but as C-46 will not be in effect, can you confirm, or can you confirm that you have all the tools at hand to make sure that you can control what's going on?
As I mentioned earlier this week, we're in the process of increasing the capacity and training for drug recognition experts. We have approximately 10 or 12 courses scheduled for this fiscal year, and that's just the RCMP. There's also several other police forces who are increasing their capacity as well.
Parce que l'an dernier, c'était une inquiétude.
Last year was a major concern when we did our study at the House of Commons on marijuana. I mean, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and others were saying we can't be ready for July 2018. A bit of pressure from the government, and maybe now if we rush ahead, we might get it done for September. Now, you say you'll be ready, but right now you're still training people, and it takes a bit of time to train people to become technicians and experts in detection. Now, do you think you'll be in any position to actually enforce the law when it comes in?
Yes, currently we have 200 drug recognition experts just in the RCMP alone. I'm not sure of the total number across Canada within the municipal police forces. Obviously, in the areas where we are adjacent to those municipal police forces, we work and share those resources. They're strategically placed throughout the country to ensure the increase in capacity is to ensure that our ability is even greater than it is now, because like the minister said, it's not a new problem.
Parlant de détection...
Well, speaking of detection, a program was put in place last year, I believe, Shipwriter. Cooperation between Canada and U.S., of course, for intercept operations, marine-based, smuggling, in other words. And I think that there was the concept of perhaps a land rider, an equivalent for territorial or land-based smuggling operations. Do you think... I was in Rock Summer last week, rather, and if we put a policeman on the American side of the border, and perhaps we can interdict them before they enter that. Is that kind of discussions going on here? Are there some way that we can act on their territory, they act on ours?
Yep.
There are, I would say, constant conversations going on between Canadian and American officials about the whole issue of the migrant movement. Mr. Ozowski's colleagues, our team are talking to their American counterparts. Law enforcement's talking all the time. In the context of a specific model like ShipRider, I think that's getting ahead of ourselves. I also think there has to be a recognition that there are questions about the movement of these people in the U.S. that is up to U.S. officials to resolve.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Ms. Paulus. There's no representative of the NDP here, and normally I would take the rule of you lose it or you lose it, but in this case, because of the unusual part of that is an unusual day, I'm just going to go directly to Ms. Damoff and preserve Mr. Davey or whoever the NDP representative is over the course of the next few minutes. So, Ms. Damoff, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I believe this question would go to Ms. Kelly, and I'm sorry we're going to have trouble seeing each other here, but the departmental plan for the Office of the Correctional Investigator indicated that a GBA plus analysis was done. Is that analysis done on corrections or on that office? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
Okay. I'm wondering, regardless, if we could get a copy of whatever analysis was done. One of the concerns that I had was when I visited the Edmonton Institute for Women, the training that's being done there is training women to sew and to do nails. And when I visited Paysac Esteo, which is for men, they're learning to frame houses and become carpenters. And it seems that there should be an analysis done of the training programs for men versus women. To go out and get a sewing job versus framing a house is putting women at a disadvantage when they get out of correction. So I'm just wondering if you have looked at the training programs, and if not, could you?
Yes, certainly we could look at it. Now, what you've seen at Edmonton Institution for Women, I do believe that we offer different programs in different institutions. It's not just sewing or doing nails or cutting hair. There are also some women that actually learn to build a house as well. Actually, we've had that at Fraser Valley Institution. So definitely we want to provide women with vocational training that's going to be transferable to the community, because the earlier question that you posed, for us, it's a priority, employment for offenders. We want to keep them productively occupied so that they don't get in trouble. They acquire skills that they can then apply in the community. And research has shown, and our own statistics, that if offenders have a job when they're released to the community, they're less likely to come back to the institution.
Yeah, and I heard that as well. In fact, the biggest indicator for success on the outside was successful work release when an offender was inside. So thank you for that. The Minister and we had a little bit of conversation earlier about the funding that's gone into address vulnerable offenders. And that includes people that have mental health issues. And again, it was actually at Edmonton Max, but I heard it at other places, that if there was one single thing that corrections could do to deal with issues in the prisons is to deal with fetal alcohol syndrome. And I'm just wondering what steps you're taking in terms of sorry, I'm struggling with the word here. When an offender first comes into corrections, identifying that it's FASD, and then also programming within corrections to deal with that particular, to deal with the fetal alcohol syndrome.
Well, there's certainly been investment made in mental health. We do in health, we do screening when offenders and women arrive at intake. In terms of fetal alcohol syndrome, actually there was, if I believe, and I'd have to check on this, some studies that were done on this. I don't know, Fraser, if you have more.
Senate committee had. Sorry, the Senate committee had done a review.
Yes. So in terms of obviously the investments that have been made, this is something that we need to look at in terms of treating offenders that come in with fetal alcohol, FASD, absolutely.
Because it's challenging for both the offender and for the staff to be able to deal with it. So if we can deal with it effectively and make those investments, we can hopefully have more success for the people who are coming into corrections, but also not putting the people who work there at risk as well, and making sure that we have a good outcome for everyone involved. So thank you for that. One of the other things that has come up are in terms of healing lodges. And we have 4 that are funded and managed by CSC, and then we have 5 that are managed by communities. I know that the ones that managed by the communities receive less funding than the ones that are managed by corrections, and I'm wondering if there are any plans to reduce this discrepancy going forward, to make sure that community-managed healing lodges receive the funding that's more comparable to what the CSC-run lodges are receiving.
So the healing lodges that are managed by the community, it's actually a collaborative process, and we negotiate with the community. And there's a number of factors that we look at. And actually, just recently, we've negotiated actually an agreement with Wessescon and in Quebec, and we've also renewed the agreements with Native Counseling of Alberta for Stan Daniels and Buffalo Sage. And actually, we have, I think I've said before this committee before, we've revised our framework, and actually the feedback is very positive, but it's a collaborative process where there's an agreement that's reached.
Okay, thank you. I only have about a minute left, and I actually would love for Commissioner Luckey to share with the committee what we were talking about earlier about what you're doing in terms of recruitment for Indigenous officers, because I was quite impressed with what you were telling me earlier, and I just wondered if you could share that with the committee.
Most people think our recruiting efforts are centralized in the big centers, but we found that the best recruiting is by our own members. So we have strategic, people placed within each province to recruit, and we go to schools. We go, for instance, when there's hockey tournaments at certain ages, because there's certain types of activities that seem to be more conducive to attract people into policing. In Regina, which is a big recruiter, the Academy provides opportunities. We have leadership, the Aboriginal Leadership Conference, where we choose youth among Canada that come to the and do a week of training strictly for Indigenous people. We also have another program where one Indigenous person, youth, and a member of the detachment come together and they're exposed to the Academy, but they're also working together to solve community issues.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate Commissioner Luckey looking at the chair so that I'm not having to cut people off. All right, Mr. Davies, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you for your kind indulgence in terms of the order.
Look at your yearbook.
Well, actually, I was scrubbing behind the minister, and he proved the adage that never use 10 words when 1,000 may work. Now the government has announced $81 million over 5 years towards the Passenger Protect program. Part of that is to implement a redress system like what Canadian Airlines already used for flights between Canada and the U.S. 2 questions. How much of these funds will be directed towards the redress system? And second, how much is the establishment of the appeal process referred to in C-59 expected to cost?
So, do we have the breakdown on? I don't think we have I don't have the figures here, but we can get that for you.
Would you mind sending that to the clerk, please?
Happy to do that.
Thank you. Now, the government has also indicated plans to implement a new cybercrimes unit within the RCMP. Are we expecting a government bill in relation to this unit? And are there any details in terms of when and how this will be set up?
By bill, you mean legislation?
Yes.
No, I don't think there's any legislation required.
Okay. Can you update us on when we might expect that unit to be set up, and maybe anything you could inform us about the progress we're making in that?
We will go and once Parliament in its wisdom approves the budget request, we're waiting for, as I say, Parliament to express its opinions on authorizing the funds. We are proceeding in terms of working with, as we are across the full cyber, there are a range of issues in the cyber initiative, seeking Treasury Board approval. And when that's done, we're working with the RCMP on that, and then I can turn to Brenda about the specifics.
Commissioner Lucky?
Yeah, we intend to set up a cybercrime coordination unit so that things can be funneled through one area, of course, because it doesn't cross, the borders are limitless. And in order to have a standardized approach where we can deal with all of the different crimes, it's a 5-year plan, and the coordination center will have investigative capacity as well.
Thank you. The 2018-2019 estimates for the RCMP include an increase in funding of $17.9 million, almost $18 million, in support of a new funding model. Actually, I read that wrong. It's $517.9 million. Could you elaborate more on what the government means by this new model and what is incurring most of these costs?
Well, I'm going to try to answer that, actually. The $517 million is on the contract side of, right, and it's a technical one-time adjustment, and it's been approved by Treasury Board, and it's changing how we collect the revenues that that are given to us, the money that we're collecting. So in effect, it's cost neutral, and it's really no change in the way we did it. It's just the way we did it in prior years, the timing of it. So it's a cost neutral type of collection.
Thank you. Turning to the correction side of CBSA, there are currently 9 healing lodges for Indigenous offenders in Canada. 4 are funded and managed by Correction Services Canada, while 5 are funded by CSC but managed by communities. Are there any plans to expand the number of healing lodges as recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
Turn to Ann
Sorry,
Kelly.
Ms. Kelly.
Actually, the way it works, there has to be an expression of interest on the part of the Aboriginal community. And absolutely, actually, there's one right now that we're considering, and it would be a healing lodge for women in Manitoba. And there's others as well that are currently under consideration. So the answer is yes.
2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I understand a question was asked on the issue of prison farms, and I must state for the record that I visited the prison farms both in, I think it was New Brunswick and here in Ontario a few parliaments ago, and was struck by how effective those prison farms and animal husbandry was, both in helping inmates who have difficulty connecting with other people to learn the social skills, and there were just a myriad of positives that came from it. Unfortunately, the previous Conservative government shut those down, and I'm just wondering, what are the plans, if any, to reopen prison farms or similar type programs to provide offenders in the federal system with the opportunities to work with animals and provide productive services and goods, not only to the prisons but also to the surrounding communities like they did in the past?
Thank you. I'll just repeat what the minister said earlier. So we're starting with the prison farms at Collins Bay and Joyceville, and then we're going to see how that works, and it's going to inform us in terms of potentially other farms elsewhere.
Now, I know in Ontario, I think it was the Kingston. Was it the prison farm in Kingston, I believe? They had livestock herd that was outstanding. And I understand that that was sold off, but that some of the local farmers actually purchased some of that stock, hoping that it could be used in the future for a reestablishment of their prison farm. Is there any plans to try to get that cattle stock, that prize-winning cattle stock, back into the correction system?
So go ahead.
Oh.
Thank you.
I'll be short.
Yes,
Since it was announced in the budget that money would be received to reopen the farms, actually currently we're working with the Prison Farm Advisory Panel on what the model is going to look like. And yes, they certainly have cared for those cows for many years now.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, for those economically verbal questions. Mr. Motts.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had it on the Francophone channel. You said 10 minutes?
No, I realize there may be some challenges with translation, but 5 minutes.
Oh, 5.
is
Oh, sorry.
a
Okay.
5 minutes, la même chose.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, before I ask the question, I want to make it very clear that my conservative colleagues and I applaud the incredible effort of the CBSA and RCMP on dealing with the illegal border crisis. It is not a problem you caused. It was a problem that was caused by the irresponsible tweet of the Prime Minister and then perpetrated further by the current government not responding to it appropriately. Now, your organizations are left to try and clean up the crisis. Having said that, you indicated that 20,593 illegal border crossers came into Canada in 2017. And now my question is, of that 5,993 illegal border crossers in 2017, how many have been ordered deported?
So I think just to start from the very process at the very beginning, as soon as someone comes across, they're given a conditional removal order. They go through all the checks with us at the port of entry, and then subsequently an eligibility hearing with us or the IRCC, and then finally a determination is made by the Immigration Refugee Board. This is a process that takes some time. Then after that, there are appeal mechanisms that are available to them. So we're starting to see from the surge from last summer, some early cases coming through. So in terms of removals last year, on any given year, we do between 7,000 and 8,000 removals. Last year, 3,947 of that 7,783 were failed claimants. A subset of that were irregular.
Failed claimants from 2017's
Failed claimants from any year. It depends on where they are. Sometimes they can exhaust different processes. It can be quite a lengthy process. In terms of actual irregular claimants last year, and I don't know from when they came, it was 227. So I think I want to impress upon the members that there's a continuum here, and it's very hard to sort of look at one snapshot. So I don't have the details, for example, on everyone that arrived in August of last year and where they might be in that continuum. But anyone that has an enforceable removal order, we will remove. Although I will state this, that the priority for us in terms of removal are the security, criminality, organized crimes. That's where we put our efforts first. Failed refugee claimants, which represents about half of that number I gave you, is our second priority in terms of removal because generally they're much lower risk.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation. I know Canadians have been asking a lot about what's the process, how long does it take? So of the 227 that you mentioned, how many of that have been ordered deported? How many of those have actually been deported?
Actually been deported?
So you said 227
they're
have
actually,
received
they have been
deportation
removed.
orders.
They have been removed.
Not just they received the order.
No. Everyone gets a conditional removal order until your process is resolved to full completion. But actually removed 227.
Okay.
But I can't tell you from what year when they first started their process. I don't have that information.
So we have no idea of the 20,000 that came in illegally, where they're at in the queue, and what impact that's having on
I would refer you to
deportation.
the IRB in terms of the timing of where they're at for their hearings.
All right, thank you. My next question has to do with, I guess, CSC, Canadian Security Establishment, whoever can answer that. So I see that in the budget that there was a transfer for the Cybersecurity Authority to CSE, which is under defense. Now, we all believe, we fully believe that there has to be full investment in increasing our our cybersecurity. But and I see that in C-74 in the budget estimates, you talk about employees from the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Center also being transferred over to CSE. But I see there's still funding for cybersecurity within the public safety portfolio. And I'm curious to know whether that's a duplicate. Like it seems like if you're taking all of that and moving over to defense, how are you able to justify both?
Two different activities. One's operational, and we are consolidating operational activities within the Canadian Cyber Centre, in essence. The relatively small amounts of funding that is remaining within the department are for policy activities, and including ongoing policy work around cybersecurity, critical infrastructure and cybersecurity, et cetera. So it's two very specific different functions.
Thank you, Mr. Motts. Mr. Fragiskatos, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for being here. I want to ask Mr. Brown, if I could, about the National Disaster Mitigation Program. And there's been a sizable increase for 2018-2019 under the main estimates. $57.1 million has been allocated for national disaster mitigation, which I think is very important, very timely, and very welcomed. Canadians see, for example, what's taking place in New Brunswick. I come from southwestern Ontario, specifically London, but our region was affected by serious flooding in the area of Chatham and Brantford. So this is all welcome, but I want to ask you the extent to which climate change factors into the decision-making when it comes to policies such as this or objectives such as this, because complex problems have complex causes. Twitter does not cause flooding. We heard on the other side that a complex issue has been caused by Twitter, apparently. What we do know is that climate change has a very, very serious impact when it comes to the cause of these national disasters. In the United States, an independent estimate of the U.S. Government Accountability Office is that over the past 10 years, $350 billion has been spent on national disasters, hurricanes, wildfires, and floods. These are obviously linked to climate change in a major way. In the European Union, between 1980 and 2016, an EU analysis found that 436 billion euros in economic losses was the result of climate-related disasters. So when we see a line item like this, $57.1 million, and I would expect that would continue to either stay the same or probably increase in years to come, to what extent does climate change impact on the decision-making here?
The approach in terms of disaster response and mitigation generally is an all-hazards response. So the causality, we look at all, factor in all elements of causality. So climate change will be, and its effects in terms of major weather events, floods, the increasing severity of fires, et cetera, in the boreal forest, all are factored in. The NDMP is a cost-shared program with the provinces. It is, I would say, suffered at the beginning from perhaps being undersubscribed. It is now the subject of a lot more interest with our provincial colleagues, and we're in the midst of a round of project assessment, project proposal assessments right now.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you also on a separate matter. $150,000 has been set aside under the 2018-2019 estimates for the Cybersecurity Cooperation Program. Can you explain what the objectives of the program are? What partners will the government be cooperating with to carry out this program?
Yeah, it's a currently constituted very modest initiative, $150,000, and it's essentially really just working with partners on specific projects that replicated isn't quite the right word, but have a high impact. So it'll be working on sharing best practices, sharing information in terms of cyber threats, a particular cyber assessment that one of our partners may have done in the private sector or at the provincial level that we can work with. It's a very modest program.
Okay, so a tool in the toolkit when it comes to cybersecurity. Okay. Now, it caught my eye, so I wanted to ask about that. The Safer Communities Initiative, can you expand on that? $42 million.
Yeah, this is a broad-based G's and C's program that works with communities across the country, Indigenous communities in particular, creating things like community safety programs that are designed by the community with external expertise that comes in, but community-led, very effective and oversubscribed by, in terms of the demand outstrips our ability to supply the services that people are looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Frederick-Skeros. Monsieur Palus, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To reply to my colleague on the issue of the tweet, the Prime Minister's tweet, is demonstrated quite clearly by the people throughout the world that as soon as there's a tweet, they just faced sheer bedlam overseas in their Canadian missions. Now, Mr. Oskowski, I asked the Minister earlier when the budget cuts, when it says that the Conservatives cut $300 million, I have a report that's the opposite. Yes, there were some cuts at the time, administratively, but operationally, in the field, there were no cuts because this study shows that there was an increase of 1.7 billion to 2 billion for 2015, and then the government cut no further. Can you confirm what the minister is telling us is either erroneous or that the numbers should correspond more to what I've been telling you?
My input on that, I can say that one quick example to explain any drop in estimates might be that there was project funding provided for several large projects as part of Beyond the Border Action Plan. Those projects have come to completion, and so as they're done and move to a steady state status, the overall budget of the agency drops. But I'd be happy to review that document, the study that you have before you, and provide you my input based on my records.
OK, mais durant la période où c'est le gouvernement conservateur qui est en place, est-ce que vous...
At the time when the Conservative government was in place, and did you get any compression of budgets, $200-300 million, as was said, for in the field operations?
Possibly.
C'est une question budgétaire.
It's the budget question.
The answer is, as Mr. Ozlowski said, which was he's happy to review your numbers and get back to you. Would that satisfy you?
Parfait, Monsieur le Président. Je vais respecter nos fonctionnaires.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to embarrass the officials, but perhaps it's accounting systems. The Liberals calculate things differently than the Conservatives. Now, as to the RCMP, we talked about MS-13. Marasavatrucha 13. Could you confirm that there are already members of that gang operating in Canada currently in our major metropolitan areas? And could you confirm also that there's an important influx, I should say, of sympathizers or like gangs to come and join their buddies up north?
Or if, in fact, they are operating in certain areas of our country. I know that any of the organizations that come to our attention, they are obviously investigated, and we try to take that intelligence, bring it to evidence so that we can properly take those type of groups to court.
Souvent, on prétend que nous créons de la division.
Quite often, we contend that there's going to be some division amongst Canadians, but we're looking for facts. If there are dangerous criminals in the country, we'd like to know it. And if means are being taken to control them, or we don't want to panic Canadians, but we don't want to be wearing rose-colored glasses and think that everything is fine. Now, can you confirm then our CMP is in full control of the situation vis-a-vis MS-13, and we can reassure Canadians to that effect today?
That is under investigation. Unfortunately, I can't share with you, but we have ongoing investigations in many areas of the groups that you are mentioning. And if it comes to fruition, Canadians will be the first to be advised.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much.
Chair, I have probably Mr. Brown, you'd be the most giving a role to answer this question. So I see in the estimates that CSIS is seeking $2.4 million more for illegal immigration reviews. So I'm just wondering the nature of CSIS's work related to illegal border crossers, and do they recognize the potential threat of having an open border for anyone that can get a travel permit to the U.S.? And is this an acknowledgement that CSIS needs significant more resources to properly investigate questionable individuals?
I think I'll turn to my colleague from CSIS, Charles Lawson,
Sure.
to be able to answer your question.
Sure.
Yeah, he's hidden away.
Yes, thank you.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So CSIS is involved in the security screening aspects of the illegal migration flow, but most of the questions have rightly been directed to my colleagues from CBSA and the RCMP, because they are the ones who are at the border, who are dealing with the people as they come in, and has been clearly articulated. Nobody about whom there are any security-related concerns is allowed to come in until those concerns have been resolved.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. And Mr. Spengelman for the final 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. My first question is for Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, we had an exchange with the Minister on the Memorial Grant Program. There was a residual question that we didn't have time to get an answer to, which is the breakdown between funds allocated to the grants themselves and funds allocated to the administration. I'm wondering if you would have that number, or if not, if you could provide it to the committee.
I do. The administration costs are up to $1.8 million. The vast majority of that will be, or the vast majority, a significant proportion of that will be funds provided to the third-party supplier who will run the program for us, except for the final decision that will rest with the department.
Thank you very much for that. My next question echoes the interest on the part of colleagues Mr. Davies and Mr. Fragascatos in the area of cybersecurity. I represent a riding a city that has some 73 Fortune 500 companies in Mississauga, many of which are data-intensive, data-centric, and there is increasing interest on the part of companies to know what the government is doing on cybersecurity. The protection of data that's held by insurance companies and banks, is that a public safety / national security issue?
That's an interesting question. I suppose it depends on who chooses to try and access that data and for what purposes. It can also be a criminal question that is associated with my friend, the commissioner to the left, and local law enforcement. So it kind of depends.
Okay, but when we're talking about the formulation of a comprehensive national cybersecurity strategy, it would definitely be within the parameters
Absolutely.
And could you update the committee on your vision, how that strategy is unfolding? You mentioned in commentary to colleagues that there's a 5-year plan. There's a cybercrime coordination unit. What would have to be done from the public safety side in terms of infrastructure, in terms of human resources to put these kinds of protective mechanisms in place, technology,
Right.
and where are we with respect to closing those gaps? That makes
Relatively speaking, Canada is quite well positioned in terms of the cyber security posture of the Government of Canada. The reality of a sort of enterprise-wide protection system that works very closely with CSE means most of my international colleagues wish they were in a similar circumstance as Canada. We have more work to do at other levels of government and the private sector, and within the private sector, different sectors are more seized with the issue, investing more heavily. I'm not going to pick winners and losers here because I don't think it's constructive to highlight where there may be vulnerabilities. But I will say the government announced in the budget a significant investment, $700 odd million for cybersecurity more generally. And I think in the relatively near future there will be an awful lot more detail about that coming forward.
Are there any processes underway at the moment that are pulling in the stakeholders and voices that should be part of that conversation?
Well, the cybersecurity strategy review, which took place over the last 2 years, it was quite extensive, had input from hundreds of participants. We are as well have a critical infrastructure forum that has all the critical infrastructure sectors represented by the private sector, by government, and they're actively engaged in these issues, and the stakeholders will be actively engaged as the government rolls out the next steps.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Chair, my final question is to Commissioner Lucki. It's not fair because there's only 30 seconds remaining, but I wanted you to give the committee a taste for your vision of the RCMP's work outside of our borders in the areas of post-conflict reconstruction, policing, and UN missions, peacekeeping work. That would fall within the ambit of our defense.
15 seconds or
Well,
less.
in 15 seconds, I know we're doing a lot of work, for instance, in the Ukraine, helping them to police in a more democratic society. And they've come to the RCMP Training Academy already 3 or 4 times, including the Secretary of State, including the judges as well, have come to Regina and worked with the judges in Saskatchewan. So lots of good work.
Thank you, Mr. Spengeman. That almost brings to an end the work of the committee on the main estimates. I want to, on behalf of the committee, thank each and every one of you for your work and your contribution to the functioning of our society. Colleagues, we have 15 votes, and I want to seek whether, first of all, we can group them and vote unanimously on them. Is that all right? We can go. So all 15 votes. So we're voting on the main estimates, and they're in front of you. Those in favor? Those opposed? The cash. Shall I report the main interim estimates to the House? On division. On division. So with that, are we? Monsieur.
Monsieur le Président, j'ai déposé une motion.
I tabled a motion earlier, Mr. Chair, as to the calling of a witness in particular, and perhaps we could discuss that and see if we could officially invite the witness.
I could say that we are out of time, and that would be the end of it. However, I am open to any suggestion that other colleagues might have.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I move to now adjourn the debate.
There we go. Those in favor of the adjournment of debate? Those opposed? Thank you. Meeting adjourned.